Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Beis Amar Aleph of Maseches Megillah at the very bottom of the page. The bottom line of the page, towards the end of the line, the Gemara says, Rav Ashi kashya leid Rabbi Yehuda ad Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Ashi had a contradiction between two statements or brisas going according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Umukim la libraisa Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. And therefore, to resolve the contradiction, he established that the first brisa was not actually Rabbi Yehuda, it was Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda. And this was the following contradiction that he posed. We're now at the top of Beis Amar Beis. Umi Amar Rabbi Yehuda bizman hazeh hol mistaklim ba ein karing asa el bizmana. Did Rabbi Yehuda really say the statement that we had learned at the end of last week's Amud, that where we quoted Rabbi Yehuda as saying that that when is it that there's situations where the villages would read the Megillah early? That was only back in the day when, as the Brisa describes, when the Jewish people were sitting in their land and had the calendar running in its normal fashion, and people, and there were messengers that would go out to tell people when the holidays were, but nowadays, ho'elu mistaklin ba, but nowadays, since people use Purim as a landmark to determine when Pesach is, so therefore, you always have to read the Megillah on the day of Purim itself, on the 14th, and we don't ever read it early. That was the statement that was attributed to Rabbi Yehuda, and Rav Ashi is asking, did Rabbi Yehuda really say that? We have a contradiction. Umi Amar Rabbi Yehuda bizman hazeh, did Rabbi Yehuda really say that nowadays, since people look upon Purim to determine when Pesach is, in karing osa ela bizmana, you have to always read on the 14th. Viramini, but we have a contradiction from a brisa. The brisa says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said, a Masai. When is it that you're allowed to read early? It's only makom she nichnasim b'sheni v'chamishi. It's only in places where they actually normally go in early on Monday. Not early, but they normally go into town on Mondays and Thursdays. That's, Rashi says, that's when the Beis Din sits, and that's when people will go into town to resolve their issues. So then, if they normally go into town on Monday and Thursdays, then we say that they are allowed to read it early, and they would read it early if Purim was, let's say, if the 14th of Adar was on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, we'd say they could read it early on Monday, because that's when they're going into town anyways. But if it's a situation, a society where they don't go into town on every Monday and Thursday, so then that's not the practice. So then we wouldn't allow them or tell them to read it early, because why would they? They don't. They're not, like, especially in town anyways on the Monday or Thursday prior. So, what do we see from here, though? It sounds like, but in places where they do go into town on Monday and Thursday, they could read it early, if the calendar works out that way. So, vafilu bizman hazeh, and it sounds like that's even nowadays. So we have one version of Rabbi Yehuda saying, nowadays we never read it early. But we have a contradiction, because we have another Rabbi Yehuda saying that you want to know who can read it early? Only places that actually go into town on Monday and Thursday. But if they don't go into town Monday and Thursday, then there's no reason to say they could read it early on the Monday and Thursday before. But it sounds like even nowadays that nothing has changed. This enactment, this practice of being able to read early is still in effect. So that's a contradiction in these two statements of Rabbi Yehuda. So therefore, to resolve the contradiction, Umukim la lebraisa Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. So he said, actually, the brisa is not Rabbi Yehuda, it's Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. It's Rabbi Yossi, the son of Yehuda. Ask the Gemara, what right does he have to say that? Umishum de kashyole to Rabbi Yehuda mukimo lebraisa Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. Because he has a contradiction of Rabbi Yehuda, so his resolution is, that must be someone else. That must be Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. How can he just say that? Says the Gemara, Rav Ashi shmiole de'ika detani la Rabbi Yehuda, v'ika detani la Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. No. Rav Ashi had heard some people say this first braisa in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, and some say in the name of Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. And since he now had a contradiction in Rabbi Yehuda, Amar, he said, Mandetani la Rabbi Yehuda lav davka. Those who say that it's Rabbi Yehuda are incorrect. Mandetani la Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda davka. Those who say that it was Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, they are the ones who are correct. So it's not just he just said, out of thin air, I have a contradiction of Rabbi Yehuda, it must be someone else, I'll pick Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. No, there were multiple traditions of who had said the first price, who had said this idea that nowadays we wouldn't read early. One version was it was Rabbi Yehuda. One version was it was Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. But once he saw that there was a contradiction within Rabbi Yehuda, he said it must not have been Rabbi Yehuda, it must have been Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. Those are the ones who are correct in their tradition of who said it. Okay. Now the Gemara goes back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah had taught us that most people read on the 14th of Adar, but Krachman, Mukaf, and Choma, but cities that were surrounded by walls, Miyamos Yoshua ben Nun, from the days of Yoshua ben Nun, so then Koren B'chamisha, they would read on the 15th. Ask the Gemara, Minahani Mili, where does that come from in the Megillah? Where do you see in the Megillah that cities that are surrounded by walls from the days of Yoshua ben Nun should read on the 15th of Adar? So Amar Rava, says, De Amarkra, because the pasuk says, Al Kein Hayudim HaProzim HaYoshvim Ba'arei HaPrazos. So it says that the Jews who are prozim, who are scattered, who live in scattered cities, scattered means unwalled, unbound, unwalled cities, so they celebrate on the 14th. Now it never says, but the walled cities read on the 15th, but we can deduce midaprazim barba asar from the fact that it's saying if you live in unwalled cities you read on the 14th mukafin mechamisha asar. So it must be that if you're surrounded by a wall, if you're a walled city, then you read on the 15th. Ask the Gemara ve'ema prazim barba asar mukafin klal klalo. How do you know that's what it means? Maybe it means that if you live in an unwalled city, you read on the 14th. If you live in a walled city, you don't read at all. It says, therefore, those in the unwalled city should read on the 14th of Adar. And what about a walled city? Maybe it means you shouldn't read at all. Says the Gemara, V'lav Yisrael ninu. What do you mean, aren't they Jews? They were part of the salvation. Whether you live in a walled city or unwalled city, of course you have to read the Megillah. Of course you have to celebrate Purim. So that's not a possibility. Ve'od, and furthermore, Mehodud ve'ad kush ksiv. It says that everyone from Hodu until Kush, basically the whole occupied world, was involved in this and accepted Purim upon themselves. Rashi says because we say in the Megillah that Vaishlach Sifarim al Kol Medinos HaMelech, that Mordechai and Esther sent letters to all the provinces from Hodu to Kush to everywhere. So L'kayim alayhem, to accept upon them Purim. So it doesn't say there from Hodu to Kush, but the beginning of the Megillah says that Achashverosh ruled from Hodu to Kush, and then it says they sent letters to all the provinces. That means from Hodu to Kush, everywhere. Hodu to Kush, by the way, usually is translated as from India to Ethiopia, but it's a way of expressing. We'll see. The Gemara will talk about it soon. Not today's daf, but coming up. Of the whole world, and so it means they sent to all the provinces, so everybody's included in it. So to suggest that the people in the walled cities don't read at all doesn't make sense. Okay, but right now we're working with an inference. It says that the unwalled cities read on the 14th, implying the walled cities read on the 15th. Ve'ema prazim bar beisar. But maybe what it's saying is if you're in an unwalled city, you read on the 14th. Mukafin be'ar beisar uvachamesar. Maybe if you're in a walled city, you have a choice, the 14th or the 15th. So the Gemara says, sorry, and it backs up with the pasuk. K'dichsiv, as the pasuk says, Yososim, that they should do Es Yom Arba Asar L'Chodesh Adar, the 14th day of the month of Adar, Ves Yom Chamisha Asar Bo, and the 15th, B'chol Shana, every year. So maybe it means that we're saying there's 2 days of Purim, and yes, we specified in the 14th. If you live in an unwalled city, you have to read on the 14th. But maybe a walled city has the choice, as it says they would make Purim on the 14th and the 15th. So says the Gemara, Ihava kasav es yom arba asar v'chamisha asar k'dei kamarta. Had the pasuk said the 14th and the 15th, but in the Hebrew, es yom arba asar v'chamisha asar, the 14th and the 15th, k'dei kamarta, then you're right, that would be a possibility that it's saying that the walled cities have a choice. But hashta dichsiv es yom arba asar v'es yom chamisha asar, so it's that extra v'es. V'es just means and, but it could have said v'chamisha asar, but it's saying v'es chamisha asar, which is extra. So it's making a separation. So es, asa es upasik. The word es comes in and interrupts and breaks it up to tell you hani barba asar. These ones read on the 14th, v'hani b'chamisha asar, and these ones read on the 15th. So you don't have it's separating and saying there's those who read on the 14th, es yom arba asar, v'es yom chamisha asar, and then there's those who read on the 15th, and it's two different possibilities, and the unwalled cities are on the 14th, and the walled cities are on the 15th. Ve'ema, but maybe it's saying prazim bar besar. Maybe it's saying the unwalled cities read on the 14th. Mukafin, and the walled cities ibau bar besar, ibau b'chamesar. If they want the 14th or the 15th, meaning sorry, the previous question in the Gemara was not that they should have the option in the walled cities. We were suggesting maybe they have to read on both. Maybe it's the 14th and the 15th. To that we said no, it separates them. The 4th es yom arba asar v'es yom chamisha asar, it's separate, meaning there's no idea of reading on both. It's separate days, and it's not one long holiday, and you read on only one of them. Okay, but maybe you have the choice. That's what the Gemara is asking now. Maybe those in the walled cities have the choice. So to that the Gemara says, Amar Kra, that's why the pasuk says, Bizmanehem, that each one should read in their times. This was a word that we worked on last week also, last week's Amud. Because it says, to establish the days of Purim, these days of Purim in their times, to teach you, Zmano shalzeh lo zmano shalzeh. The time of this one is not the time of that one. Meaning, they each place has their own time for reading the Megillah. Unwalled city is the 14th, walled city is the 15th. Okay, ve'ema betleisar. But who says it's the 15th? Maybe it's the 13th. Again, all we have is that it says that in the unwalled cities they should read on the 14th. Or I shouldn't say they should read. We'll get to that soon. But the pasuk says they should make it Purim. They should do the things of Purim on the 14th. So we said if the unwalled cities do on the 14th, must be saying the walled cities do on the 15th. Ask the Gemara, maybe it means the 13th. The unwalled cities do it on the 14th, and the walled cities do it on the 13th. So the Gemara says Kishushan. No, they're going to do it like Shushan. Because Shushan, the Megillah says explicitly that they would celebrate on the 15th. So if in Shushan they celebrate on the 15th, so it makes sense that if there's another day that the walled cities do it on, different than the unwalled cities, it's not the 14th, so we have already a precedent that the 15th is also a day of Purim, because the people of Shushan, the Megillah says, would celebrate on the 15th. So if the people of Shushan celebrate on the 15th, then the people of the walled cities, other walled cities, should also celebrate on the 15th. Okay, ask the Gemara, Ashkechana Siya, So I have a source for all the active mitzvahs, the asiyah, because it says lios osim, that you should do those days as Purim. So that includes, there's other mitzvahs of Purim besides Megillah. There's Mishteh, the mitzvah to make a feast, and maybe that's what we're saying in the unwalled cities they do on the 14th, and the walled cities they do on the 15th. But Zechira Minalan, how do I know that reading the Megillah is done on the 15th for the unwalled cities? For the walled cities. And really, how do we know even that the unwalled cities read on the 14th? What's the source? All it says, Osim, they should make it to be exact, the pasuk says, Osim es yom arba'asar l'chodesh adar simcha mishteh b'yom tov mishloach manos ish l'reu. They make that day a day of simcha, of joy, and mishteh, and feasting, and yom tov, and mishloach manos, and sending portions. So, okay, but what about Megillah reading? It doesn't say that in the pasuk. So I understand that we have a source that the 14th is the day that you do all these other things for the unwalled cities, and we can infer that the 15th is the day that you do all these things for the walled cities. But how do we know we read the Megillah that day? Says the Gemara, Amakra, because the pasuk says, "V'hayamim ha'ile nizkarim v'na'asim." It says that these days will be remembered and practiced. So remembering refers to reading the Megillah. That's how we remember the day, the events, and na'asim is the practice. So iskish zechir l'asiyah. So the Megillah compares the remembering, which is the reading of the Megillah, to the practiced active mitzvos. And so just like the osim, we make mishteh and yom tov and mishloach manos on the 14th, and the 15th for walled cities, so too, the Megillah reading, the zechira, the remembering, is on the 14th for unwalled cities and the 15th for walled cities. Okay, now the Gemara moves on now. Masnisin de lo ki haitana. Our Mishnah, which says that walled cities, what's considered a walled city? A city that was walled from the days of Yoshua ben Nun. Those are the walled cities that read on the 15th. It is not in accordance with the following Tana, the following stage of the Mishnah. The Tanya, because we have a brisa. We have a teaching, just since I haven't said it yet in this Masechta, a brisa is like a Mishnah. A Mishnah is a teaching of the Tanaim, of the early sages of the time of the Mishnah. Brisa comes from the word bra, which means out. It's what was left out. It wasn't included. It's Tanaic teachings from the times of the Tanaim, from the early sages, before the Gemara, before the Talmud. But Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who redacted and gathered the Mishnah, he didn't include every teaching, and a brisa is a teaching that he left out, but it's still very authoritative, and from the same time period. So our Mishnah, the author, the Tana of our Mishnah, is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. So we learned in a brisa, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, Rabbi Yeshua the son of Karcha says, Krachen hamukafin choma mimos achashverosh karan b'chamisha asar. Cities that were surrounded by walls from the days of Achashverosh read on the 15th. So our Mishnah says it goes by, if you were a walled city from the days of Yoshua ben Nun, much earlier, and Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says it goes by if you were a walled city from that time, during that period, the time of Achashverosh. My time of Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. What is the reason of Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha? What is his source? Ki Shushan. He thinks that you're like Shushan. Ma Shushan mukafes chama miyos Achashverosh v'kar b'chamisha asar. So just like Shushan, it was not surrounded by a wall in the days of Yeshua ben Nun. It was surrounded by a wall in the days of Achashverosh. And so, just like they read on the 15th, so to anyone else who was surrounded by a wall from the days of Achashverosh, in the days of Achashverosh, would read on the 15th. And that makes sense, because we know Shushan reads on the 15th. And Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai says that any city that's like Shushan, that's also surrounded by a wall, will read on the 15th. V'tara didan my taima. So what is the reasoning of our Mishnah? Why does our Mishnah say it goes by if you were surrounded by a wall in the days of Yoshua ben Nun? Yalef prazi. Because our Tana learns a Gzera Shava of the word prazi. Gzera Shava is when we have two of the same word in different places in the Torah or in Tanakh, and specifically when we have a tradition that we're supposed to learn one from the other, then we can. And we're saying that the rabbis here, that our Mishnah had a tradition to learn prazi. Prazi again means scattered or unwalled. So, Ksiv Hacha, in the Megillah it says, Al King HaYudim HaPrazim. It says, therefore the Jews in the unwalled cities should read on the 14th. Uksiv Hasamang in Sefer Yehoshua, it says, not in Sefer Yehoshua, in Sefer Devarim, in I think this is Parshas Devarim, it says that they had that in Canaan they had Arim Bitsuros, they had fortified cities, Bitsuros Chama, and then it says Livad Me'orei Prazi. In addition, besides for all the unwalled cities that they had, I believe it's referring to the land of Canaan. It could be referring to some of the other nations that they conquered. I didn't double check, but whatever it's referring to, it's in Sefer Devarim. It's referring to places that the Jewish people were going to conquer, and it says they had fortified cities, and that's besides for all their unwalled cities. So, but it talks about there Arei HaPrazi, the unwalled cities, Harbemo, the many unwalled cities. So Mala Halan Mukafes Choma, Mimos Yoshua ben Nun. So just like in the pasuk in Sefer Devarim, it's talking about the times of Moshe and Yoshua ben Nun. So Afkan Mukafes Choma Mimos Yoshua ben Nun. So too, it's talking about when it's surrounded by a wall from the days of Yoshua ben Nun. The truth is that the Vilna Gaon here says that it shouldn't say the words Mukafes Chama, surrounded by a wall, and that Rashi also doesn't have it. Rashi says don't read the words Mukafes Chama, because we're referring to not to the walled cities but the unwalled cities. So really what the Gemara should be saying is, just like in Devarim, when it talks about unwalled cities, it's going by what was unwalled then, obviously. So too, we're to learn from there over here that when we say Prazim, we mean, when we talk about unwalled cities, we mean whatever was unwalled in the days of Yoshua ben Nun. So it's the same thing. It's the opposite. If you were a walled city then you were not an unwalled city. But that's just how it makes sense, because we're looking at the word Prazim, the word scattered. So the drasha, the Gzera Shava, teaches us to compare, the literal analogy teaches us to compare, when it says in the Megillah that the Prazim, the unwalled cities, should read on the 14th, how do we define unwalled? So we have a tradition that says, it's not the unwalled cities that in the moment, the tradition says, go back to the other place we find the word Prazi to describe cities, back in Sefer Devarim, in the book of Devarim, where it says Prazi to describe unwalled cities, and it says that's your benchmark. If it was unwalled then they read on the 14th. If it was walled then, they read on the 15th. Okay, says the Gemara, Bishlam Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha lo amar ketana didan de lesle prazi. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha said we don't go by what happened in the days of Yoshua, we go by the days of Shushan, the days of Achashverosh. So I understand that opinion, because lesle prazi, he doesn't have a tradition for this Gzera Shava, so to compare the word prazi here to the prazi there, he doesn't have that tradition, so he doesn't, and therefore he says it goes by whatever was unwalled or walled in the days of Achashverosh. That makes sense that he rejects that opinion, because he doesn't have the tradition of the Gzera Shava. Ela Tana Didan, but our Mishnah, my Taima lo Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. Why does he not say like Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, that we go by the days of Achashverosh. Ask the Gemara, my taima? What's the reason? What do you mean? What kind of a question is that? Da isle prazi prazi. The reason why he doesn't say like that is because he has a Gzeira Shava. He has a tradition to learn that when it says unwalled here, it means unwalled like it says in Devarim, and to go by that's your benchmark. So what do we mean? Why does he not say like Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha? Because he has a Gzeira Shava to tell you, we go by the days of Yeshua ben Nun. Says the Gemara, Hachi Kamar. No, this is what it was saying. Ela Shushan de Avda Kiman. Who is Shushan going like? Well, how does Shushan fit into things? Lo keprazim, v'lo kemukafin. It's not really going like prazim, like the unwalled cities, nor like the walled cities. Meaning, if we go by what happened in Yeshua ben Nun, well, Shushan wasn't walled in the days of Yeshua ben Nun. At least we don't know that it was, so we'll assume not. And and so they should read on seemingly on the 14th. So why is Shushan reading on the 15th? So how does that make sense? How does that fit in? So explains the Gemara, my Rava. So Rava says, V'amrila Kedi, some just say it without attributing it to anyone. Shani Shushan ho v'nasa banes. No, Shushan's different because Shushan had a miracle done to it. Meaning, Shushan had the extra day to fight. So again, just the background. So in the story of Purim, Haman's decree was that they should be the Jewish people should be annihilated on the 13th of Adar. We fought our enemies on the 13th. On the 14th, we rested. And that's the day that we celebrate Purim, except for in walled cities and Shushan. So, because what happened in Shushan? Shushan, they continued to fight more on the 14th of Adar, and they rested on the 15th. So since they had the extra day to fight, and they therefore rested only on the 15th. That's why in Shushan they celebrate Purim on the 15th. Okay. Says the Gemara, Bishlam alatana didan hainu dichsim medina medina bir va'ir. Our Tana, our Mishnah makes sense. The author of our Mishnah, who says that there's different distinctions. There's those who were walled from the days of Yeshua ben Nun, and those who were not walled. And then there's Shushan, which is like a special exception, because it wasn't walled from the days of Yeshua ben Nun, but yeah, it's an exception. So that fits in to the pasuk that says, Medina, Medina, Ve'ir Va'ir. The pasuk says that these days should be remembered, meaning you should read the Megillah, and the mitzvah should be done, every generation, every family. And it says Medina, Medina in each province, Ve'ir Va'ir in each city. So what's this each province and each city coming to tell you? So Medina, it sounds like, right, there's different ones. There's Medina, there's different ways that provinces celebrate. So, L'chalik being Mukafan Choma Yemos Yeshua ben Nun, Mukafas Choma Yemos Achashverosh. What that's coming to tell you is that there's differences. It's calling them provinces, but it can mean, places. There's different types of places. There's the ones that were walled from Yeshua ben Nun, from the days of Yeshua ben Nun. There's the ones that were not walled, and those are different. Medina, there's differences. And then, there's Ir Va'ir, there's differences within cities, meaning, Nami L'chalik ben Shushan L'shar Ayaras. That's to distinguish between Shushan and other cities. Because Shushan is unique. It wasn't walled from the days of Yeshua ben Nun, but yeah, it's different. So Medina, there's different, we'll call them provinces, but it means places do it differently, depending if you were walled from the times of Yeshua ben Nun. And then there's different cities that do it differently. There's all cities that were not walled in the days of Yeshua ben Nun, and then there's Shushan, which also wasn't walled, but yeah, it's different. They read on the 15th. So that makes sense. Elul Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, but according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, we don't have two distinctions. Bishlama Medina, L'chalik ben Shushan L'shar Ayaris. So you'll say that it says Medina makes this distinction. There's different types of places. So there's Shushan, and there's other cities. That's one distinction. But Ela Ir Va'ir L'mayasa. But what is each city coming to distinguish between? Meaning, according to Rabbi Shua ben Karcha, there's just one rule. Did you have a wall at the time of Achashverosh, or did you not have a wall? That's the only distinction. And Shushan is included in that distinction. And so there should only be one distinction in the pasuk of different types of places. Again, according to the Chachamim, according to our Mishnah, so there's two distinctions. There's walled from the days of Yeshua ben Nun, and there's unwalled. That's one. Medina, Medina. There's different types. And then there's a second distinction, which is, even if you're unwalled from the days of Yeshua ben Nun, but there's difference between every place and Shushan. They're unique. And so there's Ir Va'ir, there's that distinction. But according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, there's just one distinction. If you were walled in the days of Achashverosh, or if you weren't walled. And Shushan is included in that distinction. So why does the pasuk, why does the verse in the Megillah imply that there's two levels of distinction in different places? So Amar Lecha, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha will say back, Ugatanam didam minicha. Is it really good according to our Mishnah either? He can tell you, Kivan de isle prazi, Medina lamali. Once you have the Gezerah Shava that tells you to learn from the verse in Devarim, prazim, and tells you that there's a difference, that we go by whether a city was walled in the days of Yeshua ben Nun or not. So Medina lamali. Why do I need the Megillah to speak out that there's a distinction of Medina? I already know that there's a difference between whether you were walled or not in the days of Yeshua ben Nun, and so I don't need Medina. It's not adding anything for me. Once the Megillah tells me that in the present, in the unwalled cities, read on the 14th, and I have a Gezerah Shava that tells me that unwalled is learned from Sefer Devarim of what was unwalled then in the days of Yeshua, so I know everything I need. There's a distinction between walled and unwalled. So why do I need this pasuk in the Megillah, Medina? There's different types of places. I already know that. So rather, says Rabbi Shua ben Karcha, Kra la drasha udasa. This pasuk is coming to teach me something else, a different drasha. Ukad Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. It's coming to teach me the teaching of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Hudasa. Damar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, because Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi taught, Krach v'chol hasamachlo, v'chol hanira imo nidon kikrach. That when we say that a city that has a wall, or had a wall in the days of Yeshua ben Nun, reads on the 15th, it's not just the city, but it's anything that's near it, and anything that's near imo that can be seen from it or can see it. We'll see later more about that, but and that's why in Yerushalayim nowadays it's not just within the walled city that they read on the 15th, but it's the whole city. So it's not just the city, but it's also whatever's nearby, samuchlo, and whatever's near imo, and whatever's visible with it. So, and they would read on the 15th as well. Rashi just points out that the Gemara later is going to tell us that it could mean near even if not visible, and visible even if not near. And so that's what it means when it says Medina, ve'ir, ve'ir. So he's deducing from here, I believe, just double check, that a city that's near a Medina is like it. So a Medina would be using to mean a province, but we'd be using it to mean a large city. And an Ir, a smaller city that's nearby, would be like it. So, Kol Medina, V'ir Va'ir is telling you that the cities that are near the larger cities, the smaller places that are near the larger places, get included in that and would read on the same day as them, even if only the larger city was walled, but the nearby places would read on the same day. And he says, oh fine, so the Gemara says, Ad Kama, what's considered near? So Amar b'Yirmiyah v'Tamer b'Chiyah bar Abba k'mei Chamasan l'Taveria mil. It's like the distance from Chamasan to Taveria, and that is a mil. So Vilema mil. So let him just say the distance is a mil. Why does he have to give us an example? So Hakamashmon the Shira de mil Kama Habe K'mei Chamasan l'Taveria. Because by giving us an example, he's giving us an example. He's telling us if the distance is a mil. You want to know how much a mil is? A mil is the distance from Chamasan to Taveria, as long as your village or house or whatever is within that distance, within a mil of the walled city. So since the walled city reads on the 15th, so you would also read on the 15th. And the same is true if you can see the walled city, even if you're not so close. That's going to be discussed in the Gemara on Gimel Amud Beis. Okay, we will hold here.